A friend of mine told me this story about a girl she met from Sweden who was staying with her as a couch surfer. The girl was in her mid-20s, and just the content of this horrific story that will never leave my mind. Her name was Jane. She was driving to her mother's house. They lived far out of the city and in a highly forested area. There were no streetlights and not a lot of houses. If there were houses, they were built back into the forest with long, winding driveways before any sight of life. So Jane was a late teenager driving back to her mother's home in the late evening. As she was driving, something up ahead on the road caught her eye. It was a small bundle next to the road, and as her car passed the bundle, she was shocked. It looked like a baby wrapped up in a blanket. Jane smashed the brakes, stopping 50 meters up the road. She revered back a little, and then jumped out of the car as quick as she could. Thinking that someone had abandoned a baby on the road, Jane ran over to the bundled-up blanket and exhaled a sigh of relief. It was just a toy baby. Just as she had picked up the baby, she saw headlights coming down the road in front of her. Suddenly realizing she was standing on the road alone at night, she ran quickly back to her car and jumped in, chucking on the engine and driving off. The car behind her sped up, coming up really close to the back of her car, tooting its horn at her. Jane was panicking. She started driving faster and faster, constantly checking her rearview mirror. Although she couldn't who was in the car behind her, she was still terrified. Eventually, she reached her mother's driveway. Her mother lived deep into the forest. She thought to herself that if the car followed her down the driveway, she would call her mother and tell her to ring the police. And as she turned onto the driveway, the car behind her also turned into the driveway, still very close behind her. I remember part of the story was that she kept thinking back to the baby toy and how creepy the evening had been. Jane got out her phone and called her mother. She told her she was being followed and to call the police. She was expected to arrive in about 5 minutes. The car was still following very close, and both cars were going way too fast for the type of road and for no streetlights. Jane could see nothing but what was being lit by her headlights and the headlights of her pursuer. Then she saw her mother's house in the distance of her headlights, the pursuers still very close behind her, still beeping the horn so loudly Jane's ears rang. As she got to the house, she jumped out of the car. Her mother was standing at the front of the house waiting for her with a kitchen knife in her hand. Jane ran up to her as quickly as she could. The car that was following also stopped, and the doors of the car flew open. An elderly couple jumped out of the car and were yelling and pointing to Jane's car. "Someone got into your car!" they screamed. As Jane was realizing what had happened, a man jumped out of the back seat of Jane's car and ran into the forest. Everyone just looked at each other in shock as Jane realized what had just happened. The car coming down the road had seen someone jump into her car when she stopped to check the baby. It was most likely they had left it there on the road watching for people to stop, taking advantage of people's kindness. I don't believe it was the guy's first time trying this. Always lock your doors when you get out of your car. Two years ago, on my way home from an out-of-town day trip for my son's birthday party, we went to a water park and decided to go to dinner in this really small town, after getting slightly lost due to Google Maps' crappy directions. After dinner, we noticed across the street was a county fair, so we checked it out for fun. It was getting dark, and the fair was nearly over, but we caught a tractor pull that was about to begin. We'd never been to one, so we thought it might be a fun way to top off the birthday trip. We sat on the bleachers and watched for a while. There were a lot of families there watching, and also some drunk people as well. I did not think anything of it. I had my 16-year-old son with me and a good friend of mine who was a strong guy, so I felt safe. We decided to leave the fair before the event was over, so as not to be on the road at night with the drunks. We walked back to the restaurant, which was now closed, and got into my car and set off for home. Backtracking using Google Maps directions, we got on the road that I recognized would get us back home. I noticed that as soon as we pulled out of the restaurant, there was a car behind me, the only other car on the road. The car followed us onto the road we took to get home, which I found odd because it was a desolate back hilly road with a wooded area on either side. I thought maybe they too were from out of town and were using the same cut across to get to the interstate, as it was summer and many people road trip. I still felt uneasy about it, but decided to just get off this podunk road and onto the interstate as soon as possible. As we were driving on this hilly back road, it was fully dark outside, and I kept it easy for fear of a deer running out in front of us. The car stayed right behind me. I slowed way down, hoping he would be annoyed enough to pass me for going too slow. Instead, he drove right up on my back, tailgating me. I could see that it was only one person in the car, and the windows were tinted. I dared to speed up, wanting to get on a main road or interstate as soon as I could. He stayed right behind me, going as fast or slow as I was, not bothering to get off my bumper. I knew without a doubt we were being harassed now. I was getting scared. I had my son in the back seat. This was unfair, and I kicked myself for going to the tractor pull. After what seemed like ages, we got into the interstate. I had hoped it was just some local jerk who wanted to scare some city folks, but I somehow knew it was not that simple. As I feared, he followed us onto the interstate. Even on the interstate, he tailgated us. I slowed down initially, hoping in futility that he'd pass us. No luck. I sped way up. He caught up and stayed too close. Unfortunately, the interstate was quiet on our side. I had no choice but to keep going. My friend was very angry and ready to fight if necessary, but I wanted no part of meeting this guy face to face, especially with my birthday boy in the back seat. I just kept going and prayed not to get a flat tire. At one point I got scared enough to lay on the horn while driving, hoping the noise would dissuade him, which it worked. He pulled over on the shoulder and I saw his headlights turn off. I was relieved at first, but we found it odd that he killed the lights. After that, we sped up and I was flying for home. About 15 minutes passed in blissful uneventfulness. We talked about how scary that whole ordeal was, and eventually started feeling relieved to put it all behind us. Literally, we were about 25 minutes from home, and there were a couple of vehicles here and there which made us feel less alone on the road. At one point, when the cars thinned out and we were once again alone on the road, something happened that I could not believe. Right next to us and slightly behind us, headlights burst on. He had been following us that whole time with his lights off, staying carefully behind us and waiting for his chance to scare and surprise us. I almost started crying, but at this point I was too angry. This guy has been following us for an hour now. Far ahead of us I saw the taillights of a semi. I sped up quickly, with the stranger in the car next to me trying to pace us from the fast lane. I think he realized that I was trying to catch up with the semi. So for the first time in this insane chase, he did something truly dangerous and swerved at my rear panel, a pit maneuver, trying to push us off the road. I sped ahead and missed him, clipping me by inches. I finally reached the semi-driver and got close, hugging the back of his truck as much as I dared and leaving no room for this jerk to cut me off. We went this way for a little while. Finally, and I truly believe this semi-driver knew something was wrong, because after so long of seeing this crazy driver swerving at me and trying to get in front of me as I would not let him over, the semi-driver did something I will forever appreciate him for. He swerved over into the fast lane and dangerously cut off the stranger's car, and then tapped his brakes. I took it as my cue to speed ahead from the slow lane and try to lose this creep. My hometown was straight ahead. I took a sharp left onto a back street that led to a main road and stopped in a busy, well-lit gas station. Luckily, there was a cop there. My friend got out and explained the whole situation to the officer, and he called for other cars to search for this guy. We left the gas station after calling a friend to follow me to a parking lot, where I stowed my car overnight because I did not want the guy to possibly find my house by recognizing the car. I watched my back for quite some time after that. I always notice that make and model of car in white if I see one on the streets. Thank goodness we got away safely. This story happened slightly over 20 years ago, back when I was 16. During this time, I lived with my mom and stepdad in a remote area 70 miles west of Las Vegas, Nevada. I had gone out to visit with my friends, being allowed to drive myself for the first time ever. Had a lovely time watching a movie and getting food together until it was time for me to head home. The curfew I was given was 10 p.m. with the caveat that if I was running late for any reason, to find a payphone and call. The night wrapped around me and my old 71 Chevy pickup, as there were no streetlights or houses for most of my way home. As I pulled up to the first of 2 stop signs, I could see an older sedan stopped with its hazards on. I pulled up behind it and waited as a man in his 40s started walking towards me from the driver's side. Even at this point, I didn't have any alarm bells going off. Being in the middle of the desert providing assistance to stranded people was common. People rapidly get into severe problems there by not having enough water, when a vehicle breaks down or not realizing that it's in the desert, and people die wandering delirious away from the highway trying to find help. Anyhow, I rolled down my window, and as he came abreast of my door, I could smell the liquor on him. I could see another man in the passenger seat. As this was before anyone I knew had cell phones, and the nearest payphone was a good 10 minutes drive ahead. I didn't have a way to call the cops on a drunk driver immediately. The man explained that his car stalled and asked if I could help them out. I asked if his car was a stick shift, which it was. So I asked if he was familiar with push starting it. He said yes. So I agreed to as gently as I could push their car with my truck while they turned the engine over. I knew my truck would be fine, and I didn't feel like it would be wise to get out and try to push their car physically. Push starting the car worked without a hitch, but here's where things go south. They get back out and thank me, then invite me to hang out and have some fun with them. I decline. They pull off to the side of the road and I continue on my way, only they start following me. So here I am. It's 9:50 p.m. and I'm running late because I stopped to help them. These drunk, creepy older guys have started to follow me on a road without any man-made light, except for car headlights, and I'm at least 10 minutes from a payphone. I think to myself, maybe I'm being paranoid. So I turn down a road that I know gave me a couple turnoffs to either head back to town or loop around to the gas station with a payphone. The car follows behind. I'm thinking, shit. I take another turn that only leads to a couple houses at the end of the road, and they turn behind me. I take another turn to loop around back to the hat station, and they follow again. So at least I know they are following me, and not just heading home. At this point, my heart is pounding. I decided to try something to lose them. I pull to the side of the road. I see them pull up behind me. I wait as the driver gets out of the car and begin walking towards me. His companion also gets out and starts walking towards me. I wait until they almost get to my tailgate, then floor it. My wheels dig into the rocks and poof dirt, causing a cloud behind me. With the lead way, I head towards the gas station. The gas station is deserted, but the payphone is showered in the light from the gas pumps. I call home and explain what happened and why I was running late. My stepdad asked if the gas station worker could be seen, and I let him know I couldn't see him behind the counter. He was probably in the back. I wasn't in trouble, but I was asked to hurry home. So, to the 2 drunk idiots that wanted to kidnap 16-year-old me on my first night driving by myself was something that haunts me to this day.